I grew up very poor. There were many times where our power got shut off, our water got shut off. I became a victim of child abuse and neglect. I can remember times where the only thing in the fridge was like a thing of butter. My mom sobered enough to realize that she couldn't care for me and my sister. That's kind of the way that pain tends to work for most people if we don't address it and we don't allow ourselves to heal, is we unintentionally internalize it and then we end up paying it forward. Be the little seed, or the little spark that helps someone along that journey or to find their path as well. So once I finally found a place where I was able to be safe and secure, that's when I had to start doing that process of healing and finding myself and understanding what was the point. Everybody has a story that's worth hearing. And if you really listen to someone's story, there's going to be some sort of lesson that you can take away that's going to help you something at some point. It may not be today, but
Steve, I really want to thank you again for coming onto the podcast to have this conversation with me. I always say that this is more of like, I want it to be a very raw conversation, things that, if we were to sit down at a coffee shop, and I know this is virtual, I know we're looking behind screens and cameras, but I want it to be like if we ever sat down at a coffee shop and we had a conversation, I really wanted to get to know you. I'm a big storyteller. And so I always like to get to know who a person is behind everything that people see on social media, everything that people see as you on a daily basis. And so the first question that I want to ask you is, what do I have to know? What do the audience, people listening, have to know about you specifically to know, more importantly, what the mission is that you're on and the person that you are today?
Yeah, definitely appreciate you coming on and having a virtual coffee with me, for sure. You about being a storyteller, I definitely resonate with that. I was born and raised in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which, that's a big part of mountain heritage, is sitting around a fire, stories. My grandparents, my aunts and uncles, they did that. And, something I enjoy doing as well. As far as my mission goes, I really just feel that everybody has a story that's worth hearing. And if you really listen to someone's story, there's going to be some sort of lesson that you can take away that's going to help you something at some point. It may not be today, but it's just been my experience. The more people I talk to and the more people I listen to, regarding, who they are, where they come from and what their journey has been, there's always these little seed or takeaways that sometimes come back later on in life. I'm like, oh, like now I see how that applies to me. So that's really my main mission or goal here is to just share who I am, where I'm from, and now I've got to where I am today, and maybe somewhere along the way that can be the little seed, or the little spark that helps someone along that journey or to find their path as well.
Steve, you can just walk me back a little bit to your childhood, and based off the information you sent me, I think that was a journey that was very interesting as far as like what shaped you to the things that your purpose on what you're doing in now. Can you walk me through a little bit about your background? Were you always entrepreneurial in growing up? How was your environment like growing up?
Yeah, so I grew up very poor. I lived in a single wide trailer with my mom, my stepdad, my sister. We were on food stamps. There were many times where our power got shut off, our water got shut off. I think my mom tried her best, but she did struggle a lot with drugs because she was a victim of abuse as a child. And that's kind of the way that pain tends to work for most people. If we don't address it and we don't allow ourselves to heal, is we unintentionally internalize it and then we end up paying it forward. So, I became a victim of child abuse and neglect. I can remember times where the only thing in the fridge was like a thing of butter, right? One of the, like one of those Betty Crocker things of butter. I remember my little sister very vividly just eating that with a spoon because that's all the food that there was. So to answer your question, man, I mean, we grew up from a very young age. It was very hard and it was a very unstable and a very painful sort of experience. So it is an interesting question that you asked, is how do you go from there to here? And, the answer is at some point, my mom sobered up enough to realize that she couldn't care for me and my sister. And so she got us out of that situation. She dropped us off with my grandparents and said, hey, I'll be back in a couple days to get you. And then she kind of just disappeared. And that left us being raised by my grandparents, who are, very kind, very hardworking, just good old Southern, folk, as you say. So, once I finally found a place where I was able to be safe and secure, that's when I had to start doing that process of healing and finding myself and understanding what was the point of enduring all those things. What's the takeaway? What's the lesson? How can I turn this into a positive? And so, I think that we all have that ability to change our perspective if we really want to. And we can take any situation, whether it's good or bad, and turn it into, the opposite. So for me personally, I just chose to turn all those negative experiences and all those, painful situations that I had no control over, whether I was in or not, into a way of saying, okay, well, now I'm stronger for those things. And now I'm to lead a life that is in servitude of others in a way of trying to ease their suffering and share suffering, and how I moved through those things and how I didn't let them hold me back in life. The other question you asked was, have you always been an entrepreneur? So funny thing about that, right? The answer is, I think, yes. I just didn't know it. I've always enjoyed building things, whether it's, with team or, I'm a very creative person. I picked up guitar from a very young age. So started a band. I would say that's probably my first business that I had was a rock band. And, thinking back where I am now running an insurance agency, to then a lot of the same mentality was there. I was organizing the practices. I was organizing the shows, doing the merch. I was planning everything, keeping all the other bandmates in line. So even all the way back when I was 16, 17, 18, I've always kind of this natural inclination towards managing organizations. So I went from being in a band, serving tables on the side, to being a yoga teacher for a few years, try to turn that into a business. And what led me to insurance sales is I just realized at some point, okay, the intention is there, but missing is the actual skill set, selling and marketing, networking, right? So I had to go somewhere where I could learn those things, and that's how I got into this industry today. I've been doing insurance for about 5 years. I've sold about $4 million worth of, clientele myself. And then I've now built and led a team that's about $40 million in sales. So that equates to about 4,000 or 5,000 different families that we've helped over the years.
one of the things that I was thinking about as you were sharing that was, I feel like as a child, it was crazy. Rocky told me this. He was one of our guests on the show, and he said that the ages from 6 to 12 is really what defines how your adult years go, your 20s to your 30s, and then based on what you do in your 20s and 30s is what happens, for the rest of your life as far as once you hit 40. And so, I guess what I was thinking about the most was that as you were a kid, did you ever notice? Did you ever know what was going on? Were you aware of all the things that were going on that was happening to you? What your parents might have been doing, the environment that you were in, or did you feel like maybe that was normal because that was the only thing that you ever saw or were taught or were able to go through? Did you see it as a normal thing, or were you even aware of the things that were going on?
Yeah, I honestly don't think I was. I think that we are to some degree a product of our environment. So, kind of going to what you just said, I was around that for so long as a child, and that's all I saw and that's all I knew. So, I think that there was a part of me that was like, okay, this is just the way life is. And when I was able to get away from that environment and into somewhere where I was safe and secure, that's where it really challenged me at a young age, because there was all this anger and resentment and sadness and confusion that's hitting me as what, like an 11 or 12-year-old, right? Trying to process all these things. And I think that's something for me that I look at as a gift. And I know that that sounds weird, but time is the biggest healer. And when I think about where I am now today and the emotional intelligence, the empathy, the patience, the discipline, the perseverance, all those things kind of started whenever I had to learn how to overcome all those emotions that I was feeling as a small child as a result of what I was put through.
And I always find this interesting because a lot of people always say, I understand, right? Like they always say, like, I understand what you're going through. I understand what you're feeling. But in reality, I don't think anybody ever does understand. And that's the reason, because everybody has their own journey with it. I guess what I really want to talk about is, I guess, how did you forgive those things? How did you move past that? I know you mentioned that you probably had like you did yoga, meditation, different types of things that you tried. How did you forgive it?
Yeah, so my grandma, she checked me into therapy whenever I was, living with her, and I did that for a little while, and that was helpful. I would recommend it to anyone. After a certain number of years, though, the therapist basically recommended me to a psychiatrist, and they tried to implement, medication. Again, like I said, my grandma is very old school, Southern, doesn't really believe in that sort of stuff. So she did not, let them prescribe me anything, and, kind of pulled me out. And that's when I kind of picked up the guitar, and I picked up writing and journaling, and, later on got into the meditation, the yoga, the breath work. All those things definitely helped for sure. But really, the core of your question was, how did I forgive, or how did I learn to forgive? And it was just kind of this realization that someone ain't doing all that work, through all these different outlets of self-expression, that I kind of had the realization that the reason that those things were done to me is because someone inflicted pain onto the person who was doing those things to me to begin with. So to me, pain is like poison, right? If you let that poison seep down within you too deeply, then unfortunately you're going to keep passing it on to other people. It's a cyclical thing, right? So it was a it was a choice that I made eventually to spit that poison out. And the way that I was able to spit that poison out is to forgive, right? Not forget, but to forgive, because I I think there are some people that are just inherently evil, right? I do believe in balance. And if people can be wholly good, then people can be wholly evil. But I didn't believe that that was the case when it came to, my mother. I didn't believe that that was the case when it came even to my stepfather that would beat me and lock me in my room. I don't think that they're evil people. I think that someone is evil to them, and instead of how to deal with that in a healthy way or to learn from that, they subconsciously end up absorbing that behavior and then continuing that cycle. So I think that that's because I'm a big energy, right? And I think that at some point in every bloodline and every family, there has to come a time where that bad energy, that bad karma, the suffering, the pain, somebody has to come along and break that cycle. And I essentially just took that upon myself to be that person.
It's interesting that you say that, because I've been thinking about this most recently, is that I feel like a lot of people, they hold grudges. A lot of people hold hatred within them and they carry it on through their life. And, it's as funny as it sounds. A lot of people, they hold a grudge towards somebody, and then a week later, that other person might forget, but the other side of that might still hold on to that grudge. Like that. I like how you said forgiveness, and I feel like there's no real way to able to explain how to really forgive somebody. It's just something that you kind of have to cope with, or it's an emotion that's just, you go about it in your own way. There's not really a way to actually forgive anybody. Was there ever a moment that you didn't want to forgive something, didn't want to let go of a grudge? And what happened after you did? Did anything change? Did everything stay the same? What was one of those grudges like that you maybe might have held and that nothing ever happened if you let it go?
The hardest grudge I think that I've had to deal with has been with my mother, because she did, you know, she did leave us behind. There was this cycle where she would pop up for a little while and then disappear, and pop up and disappear. And the funny thing is, the way that I ended up being able to like get over that grudge is, at some point he started to hear through my other family members that I was becoming very successful. She reached out to me and she asked me to help her with rehab. And at that time, I still was very, very resentful. I was very, very resentful of her. I had pretty much pushed her out of my mind and out of my life. So there was very much so a grudge still there, but I still helped her, because at the end of the day, she gave me life. So I felt obligated to give her the opportunity of new life as well. And she was in rehab and therapy for about 6 to 8 months. And then I sent her back home to Tennessee. And about 2 or 3 months after that, I got a call that she had overdosed and she had died. And that was a little over a year ago that happened. And so just that I began to forgive her and let go of that grudge, boom, all these feelings are back again. All the resentment is there again. Which I had felt like we had finally started to become, father and mother, or I'm sorry, mother and son. Like we finally started to develop some sort of relationship that was open and healthy, and then she's gone, just like every other time. And that's been tough, man. I don't know if honestly, just being completely genuine with you, I don't know if I've forgiven her for that. And I know that's almost selfish to say, but, she's free of all pain and suffering and, all guilt and all repercussions of her actions. But I'm still here dealing with all of it. I'm dealing with her mother, my grandmother's pain, dealing with my sister's pain, dealing with my own pain, trying to keep the family, from falling into shambles. And I really feel deeply for the people that have had that happen, whether it's a family member just natural causes or suicide or overdose, because us that are still here that love that person, we're the ones that are left to really try and sort through those emotions and try and find forgiveness, maybe not even just for that person, so for ourselves. And that's been a big part of my journey over the past year or so, is trying to forgive myself. I've had those thoughts of, well, I could have done more. I could have spent less time on my business and more time with her. I could have paid for better doctors. I could have paid for better treatment. I could have been more patient. It sucked, but that's the way the time works. Like, we can't go back. We can only go forward. And the best way for us to move is to be very present and, process and sit with it. And only time will allow us to heal, and only if we sit with it and be present. At least that's been my experience.
Steven, I don't know how to word this. This is probably going to be the toughest questions I probably ask, and it's okay if you don't answer this. It's really tough when you're talking to somebody you first met for the first time, right? Like, we've just met for the first time, and then hearing these stories. It's really tough. It's really tough to ask questions like this one, and it's okay if you decide not to answer it. What was the last conversation you had with your mom? What was one of those last moments that you had with her?
The last conversation I had with my mom was a 3-way call between my mother and my little sister. I had bought them a house. They were supposed to be taking care of each other. My mom basically been lying out of work and got herself fired. And my sister knew that she was using again, but my sister was so afraid that I would kick my mom out that she didn't tell me. And eventually it all came to a head. Everything, came out anyway. And the last conversation I had with my mother was essentially me screaming at her and telling her how she was selfish for not just wanting to take advantage of the new life that I was trying to give her and to take care of her daughter. And she said to me, "I love you. I'm excited to see you for 4th of July." And I said, you're not coming to see me for 4th of July. You're going to go get a job, and you're going to be responsible, and you're going to do what you're supposed to do, because you're supposed to be taking care of yourself and your daughter. That was the last conversation I had.
What earlier you mentioned that the reason you were able to forgive was because she gave you life. And I felt like that was very strong. I felt like that was a very strong phrase that you said. The reason why was because you mentioned the word life. At the end of the day, it's like, we don't know how much life we have. We don't know what's going to happen within the next hour, within the next minute. And so looking back at everything now and where you're at right now, we think is your purpose in life.
I used to think that my purpose in life was to ease the suffering of others. But with everything that's happened to me in the past year. I think that that's changed a little bit because there's been this realization that I don't have the ability to ease the suffering of others because that's something that's internal. And the most powerful medicine that anyone will ever find is going to be within themselves. So I think that's shifted a little bit now to being more from a place of, let me just pass, along what I've learned and what I've downloaded, right? And be more of a conduit, right? So, like I said, I'm a big energy guy. I think that there are certain levels of vibration that a human being has to be on to receive certain pieces of information. And if they're not there at that present moment, they're not going to be able to tune in. So now I think my purpose has shifted a little bit to just trying to be the highest vibration version of myself and try and be as present as possible and communicate whatever I'm downloading, whatever I'm channeling, openly and honestly, and whoever's ready or is on that frequency to receive that information or that message from source, right? Light, love, God, whatever you want to call it, then great. And whoever's not, it's not my responsibility, right? All I can do is just be. I think it was Ram Dass, he's like a yogi from the 70s. He said, the best thing that you can do for me is be the best version of you. And the best thing I can do for you is be the best version of me. So I think that's how I've learned to cope a little bit with the guilt and the feeling of a failure. Like I could have done more. Because I kind of realized at a certain point that it was never in my power to change someone else. We can only change if we want to change. And then we have to do the work and we have to start paying attention and listening for the answers. Because whatever it is that you need, whatever message or medicine, that can beat us to that new path or that change or growth, it's out there. You just have to tune in.
Real quick, I want to cut into the conversation and say thank you to everybody listening right now, to listening to the conversations that we have with our guests, to following the podcast and being engaged with the podcast. I can't tell you how much that means the world to me and the team, for you to give an hour of your day to listen to these stories, to follow the podcast, to listen to these conversations. You can be doing anything else with that 1 hour, but for some reason you chose to come here and listen to these conversations. So I'm very grateful and thank you. It's crazy that you mentioned that because I had a question lined up, but as you just said that last part, I started thinking of something that it literally just happened today. I was at work today and I had an old business partner that I did marketing with him. I did a bunch of stuff when I was like way younger. And just about last year, we ended that partnership because he ended up going through a lot of like different mental issues. He started naming himself in third person. He did a lot of crazy things where he would burn his dad's house down. He would walk like from one city that's close by near us. It was like 45 minutes of a drive, but it took him like half a day to walk it. And he said he chose to walk it. And it got me thinking because I really try to help him a lot in like what he was going through. And I would be the only outlet for him to be able to talk to, as far as like everybody would think he was crazy and he would do a lot of crazy things, but he needed somebody to talk to. And it's crazy because today I saw him and he's completely good now. He's completely healthy. And I talked to him about it and I told him, I was like, hey, what is like, how are you doing? I mean, throughout that whole last year was a really crazy year. I mean, his dad came to me and his dad was crying. He was looking for help and all that stuff. And he told me that he ended up getting help, but that he had to figure it out on his own. Nobody was ever able to help him. He got admitted into a facility. he spent like 3 days there, and they let him out, and he had to figure it out himself. No matter how much anybody wanted to help him, no matter how much somebody wanted to just be there for him, he needed to go through that on his own and find his own help and be able to heal himself on his own. So it's crazy to me. It's crazy to me that you say that, because I mean, seeing him now, he's perfectly fine, but seeing him last year was just crazy. And so you are right about that. It is, sometimes people, as much as you want to help somebody, you can't really help them, because it's going to be their own way. It's going to be the way that it's meant for them. They're going to have to figure it out, and nobody else can do it for them. The question that I had lined up before that, though, was there's millions of people that are going through the same situation. There's millions of people who have jobs and things like that. Based off of your experience, what would you say to anybody who may be going through the same scenarios, maybe have experienced that and they're still not able to cope? What would you like to share that maybe can help them get through these same scenarios?
What's been very helpful for me, because the way I dealt with it in the beginning is the way that I dealt with most of my problems throughout, the entirety of my life, but it didn't work in this scenario. The way I usually deal with things is I self-isolate, I reflect, I journal, I write songs about it. I kind of try and work through the emotions on my own. Did not work for me this time. So eventually, what I was led to was community and, spirituality and surrender. And I don't think that there needs to be a label on that. I'm someone that practices Eastern and Western religions, and I take things, many different religions all around the world that resonate with me on a spiritual level. So as long as you can find some sort of community that's non-judgmental, and you can find some sort of way to put some light and some love into your life, because that's what saved me. That's what pulled me back. Because, the stuff we're talking about right now, man, it's dark and it's painful. And when you're there, it can sometimes feel like you'll never be able to get out. And I think that's how my mom felt. I think there was a moment when she was going through treatment where there was community, right? And there was love and there was light. And as soon as she wasn't around those things anymore, she went right back to that dark place. So my advice to anyone that's going through this stuff is don't go through it alone, because you're not going to be able to find your way back to the light by yourself.
What was I'm thinking of your brother. You had a brother, right? You had a brother and a sister?
Yeah, I have one sister from my mother's side, and then I have one brother and one sister from my father. So all half siblings.
What were their experiences like, as far as like seeing all this going on? Did they go through the same similar stuff? How did you guys, as siblings, half siblings, how did you guys come together to help each other out?
Well, my little sister, she lived with me and my mother as children when we were going through all the abuse and the neglect. When we got to my grandparents, we were together for a little bit, but then she actually got separated, and her dad took her. So I actually ended up not seeing my little sister for about, I believe, 10 years, because they basically wouldn't, like, blocked contact between me and my little sister. So when I finally did get back into her life again, unfortunately, her dad and, his family, they weren't nearly as patient or, you know, I guess, able as my grandparents were and facilitating the healing. So she handled our childhood in a completely opposite way. And she actually ended up getting into some pretty bad drug problems for a while after she turned 18. And maybe this is why things happen the way they do. But when my mom reached out to me to get sober, it wasn't long after that little sister reached out to me to get sober. And so in a way, that was kind of a catalyst for her to say, okay, hang on, right? And so, like I told you, I helped them both, and then I bought them a house, and they were supposed to be taking care of each other. So it's been really tough for my little sister. She's still sober, and I'm really proud of her. She literally was trying to stay sober with my mom, help take care of her, pay the bills, not make it my problem. And now she and I have had to deal with, the death and the loss and the pain and the regret and the guilt. And despite all, she's still sober. Through. I talk to her every single day, man. We're very, very close now, just like we were very, very close when we went through this shit as kids. There was just that space where we weren't around each other, where she processed it a little bit different than me. And that's what I'm saying. It's gonna be a lot better if you can find community. If she would have had me or my grandparents in her life at the same time that I had my grandparents in my life, then I really believe she wouldn't have even turned to the drugs, right? Because that's the thing with, drug and alcohol abuse is typically it's just because you're trying to numb something or run away from something that you haven't dealt with. That's usually why it happens. Now there's, hereditary tendencies and there's learned behaviors. There's a lot that goes into it, right? But, the core of it is there's some poison within you and you're trying to cover it up with more poison. That's the way that I look at it.
Another very difficult question, and I think this is equally as difficult as the previous question. Do you think you'd still be here if it wasn't for getting help and doing all the other stuff or forgiving? Do you feel like you still would have been here? Do you think you still would have been the person you are today? And then I guess a second thing to that would be would you go back and change anything?
I don't know if I'd still be here today if it wasn't for the healing and the forgiveness. I can tell you that if those things didn't happen, I was still here today, I would be a very angry, resentful, useless. I would blame everyone and everything for all of it, right? And there was a point in my life where I was doing that. I had some really bad anger issues as a kid, to the point where, I'm not proud of it, but I threw a desk at a teacher because I didn't know how to write cursive, because I had been through so many different schools that I just never picked it up. And, she was kind of making me feel dumb for it. And it's not her fault, right? But, just learning how to control your emotions and learning where they're coming from and why you're feeling this way. These are things that if I never learned how to do that, I would be like my oldest cousin, who also was beaten as a kid and also was in, a situation where there was a lot of drugs and alcohol. He's been in prison for 8 years because every time he gets out, he just turns to violence. So I would imagine that's probably what my life would look like if I even was able to last long enough to become an adult, To answer your other question, if I could go back and change anything, I really, I really don't, I really don't think that that's a healthy way of looking at life. I think if you start thinking about wanting to go back and change this and change that, then it's taking away from the true work that is meant to be done when you're reflecting on your past, which is, you know, what are we supposed to learn? How are we supposed to grow from this? How am I going to decide that this defines who I am today? So no, I wouldn't change anything, because if I change one thing, then it could change everything. And I've made peace with who I am and, where I stand in the world and what I'm trying to do. So no, I wouldn't change anything.
Steve, you're a mentor now today, and you have a group of a team that you lead. Hearing all that, hearing your journey, hearing your childhood, hearing the things you've experienced in life. You now coach people, you now mentor people. And my question isn't what the best piece of advice is. I guess my question is, what is your definition of success now compared to what it used to be? And how do you portray your version of success to the team that you have and the people that you coach, and the people around you? How do you define success? How do you define even happiness as well?
Well, when I first got into this, success, was a version that most Americans probably believe, which is, financial freedom, right? That's kind of how we typically measure success is through the material. And while I do still believe that is important, I think that success for me is being able to take care of others, to have enough for oneself, to also be able to give, to friends, family, or just even a stranger that's in need. That was the reason that I sought out financial freedom to begin with, is because I didn't want to have to worry about only having enough for me and not being able to go out and do things like this, right? This podcast, or the book that I'm working on, or the next album that I'm going to write. I got to have time to be able to do those things. And as the old saying goes, time is money, right? So I think that was the first step for me, was how can I become financially successful and stable so that I can kind of buy my time back. And then to answer your question as far as what is happiness, happiness to me is using that time to experience, right? People, places, emotions. I'm a big traveler. I just got back from Portugal. Spent 2 weeks in Portugal. First week was a yoga retreat. The second week was just exploring a bunch of different cities and towns. And, the fact that I'm even saying, I'm so grateful that I've sacrificed so much to come to this career, because, I'm just a farm boy that grew up in a trailer, on food stamps. And I just got back from Portugal. I just met people from all over the world and just had the coolest conversations, and ate the coolest food, and saw amazing architecture, amazing, parts of Mother Nature. And I think that for me, that's happiness, making sure that the people that I love and care about are good, and being able to spend my time creating, learning and exploring.
That gets me thinking a lot on the perspective of, the things that we always take for granted, right? Everything that we take for granted, as far as like the food that we eat, being able to have a car to take us around. In the city that I live right now, I live in the border of like U.S. and Mexico here in West Texas, and we see a lot like the migrants right now that are walking around that came over, and how they're trying to figure out their lives and the things that they're doing. And it's not easy. It's not easy to look at, because at the end of the day, everybody's a human being. And so everybody has their own stories on how they did something or how they got somewhere, or just always trying to figure out life. It's a difficult conversation to have because it's stories that everybody has that they might be scared to share. They might be not knowing what people are going to say. By you letting out your story, did you ever feel more relieved when you were able to talk about it? Did you ever feel more happy, I guess, to be able to share your story, or to be able to let people know things that were going on that maybe back then you might have been scared to talk about, if you were?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it makes me happier. I think it definitely makes me feel lighter. And I know a lot of people that are like this. Certainly for me, when I begin to articulate my story or answer these types of questions, every time I've talked about this stuff, there's like a new thing that comes along with it. You know, I'll say something or I think about it in a different way. It's helpful. And I think that that's why therapy is so powerful. I think that's why playing music is so powerful, you know, painting, poetry. You got to get it out somehow, because if you don't let it flow through you, feel it, and you know, let it go, then it's just going to linger. And when it lingers, it festers. It becomes an anchor. It becomes that poison that we're talking about. So, you know, this is partly me trying to help other people, but it is partly me um, being able to learn a little bit more about myself and learn a little bit more about, you know, how this thing affected me in one way or another, and you know, what we can do or how we can use that in a positive way to help ourselves and to help others.
So I have two last questions that I want to ask you. And the first one is, I started loving to ask this question is, what do you think about the most, and why do you think about that certain thing the most?
Well, I think about my grandmother and my sister the most. I think about my grandmother the most because I feel like she's a big part of why I'm not a very bitter, angry, selfish person. And I think about my sister the most because when I think about her, I think about what I'm feeling and what I'm going through. I know that she's feeling what she's going through. It's probably very similar. And so I want to do everything I can to help them, to ease their suffering. And that comes the next lesson that I need to learn that we talked about, right? Because previously, this type of person, and it's like, oh, like, let me save you, let me help you, right? Now I'm realizing that really the true way that you're helping someone is not by doing the work for them or trying to shield them from their pain or suffering, but you know, just holding space and letting them speak about it and letting them work their way through it.
I'm gonna sneak one more before I ask you our ending question, and I just remembered about it was, what is an untold story that you've never shared before that you can maybe think that you can share it here?
Mm. The first time that my stepdad took me hunting, um, I really didn't want to go. I was really young, probably like 7 or 8. Um, Basically made me kill the deer. When we walked up on the deer, it was still wheezing. I'm still alive. And then I started crying. And then he beat me because I was crying. And then he made me take a knife and slit the deer's throat. And I don't know, man, that just really, it really, taking another being's life at a young age like that and not even understanding why you're doing it. There's no preface of why we're going hunting or what we're doing out there. It was just, hey, here's a gun, inflict violence, take this life. And if you don't, I'm going to, in my mind at that time, take your life is kind of what was going through my head. So that's something I never really, I guess, shared with anyone or really haven't thought about in probably 20 years.
This whole conversation, I've been lost with words because this isn't easy to talk about. This isn't an easy conversation to have, especially for me. It's not easy questions to ask. And what you just said right there is the violence, like having to give violence and portray violence and not know why you're doing it, and your whole life has been through that. It's tough. It's tough to have a conversation about this, and it's very tough for me to be able to have this conversation with you. And so I just really appreciate you sharing those stories and sharing that. Our closing tradition that we have is our previous guest leaves a question for the next guest, not knowing who the next guest is going to be. And so the question that they left for you was, it's a really good question. What has been an experience you learned from the most?
I would say the experience that I've learned from the most, it's going to be anything where I've failed. I think it depends if we're talking about on a business level or a personal level. If we're talking about on a business level, I would say, the first 8 weeks of my commission only sales career that I'm in now, where I didn't make a paycheck and almost gave up and quit. On a personal level, it's definitely, the passing of my mother, for sure. It's taught me so much.
That's right.
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that I understand, but one can paint its own picture. And I think this whole conversation has been just about fight. I mean, I feel like you've fought throughout your whole life. Not once did you ever, I guess, catch a breath or catch any type of relaxation. And so it's crazy. I'm really lost for words. Before I let you go, Steven, is it okay if we have Daniel come back up and we do a little segment at the end where he asks you maybe two questions that I might have missed throughout the conversation that maybe he caught on? Is that okay with you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Daniel, are you still there? Let's see if he's still there. Give me 1 sec.
I'm here. You hear me? You hear me?
Yeah, there you go.
Sorry. I'd like to thank you for being on the podcast. I'm just like Isaac. Your story is so impactful. I think Isaac touched a lot of the questions that I would have probably wanted to ask. I kind of want to sway a little bit so such personal questions and kind of go into business type of aspect. At the beginning of the podcast, you said you're in the life insurance business, and a while back before the pandemic, I was in the life insurance business myself. So I kind of understand how it is. I didn't last too long in it because of the pandemic and those things that happened with life, but you literally hold the balance of other people's future and lives after somebody passed away. Can you talk to me a little bit about how you coach those guys, right? To go out there. I believe life insurance is, 1099. So, you don't work, you don't close, you don't eat. So how does that mentality, with all your life experience and everything, how does that translate into your business side of things? How you go out there and train people, to always be closing, and 1099. I mean, you don't close a deal, you don't eat. How does that? How do you do that?
That's a good question. We actually do. My team does health insurance and life insurance, so we do both. We are all 1099, right? Kind of going into what he was saying earlier, I've just kind of had this underdog theme throughout my whole life. So I'm used to having to starve a little bit, and fight a little bit for what I want. So I definitely instill that in the agents as far as tapping into what their why is, because I think that's super important. You know, why do you want to be successful? Why do you want to be financially free? Because if something surface level, when it starts to get tough, you're going to give up, most likely. And then you were talking about the old ABC, always be closing, right? I don't really look at, and this is a big stigma with sales, and it's a stigma that I had when I first got in the industry. A lot of people see sales individuals as someone that's just trying to make a buck any way they can, right? And there are salespeople like that out there. That's not the way that I operate, and that's not the way my agents operate, because it's not in me to be that way. I'm always trying to find the problem, right? Because if you're online looking for health or life insurance quotes, it's because you probably have a problem. You either lost coverage, your premiums went up, right? Your plan isn't offering the benefits that you want. So I always just train the agents to find, as much about the situation and the need of the potential client as possible. And by the time you get through asking those sorts of questions and really, discovering what the client needs and what they're looking for, that sales resistance is going to go down significantly. They're not going to feel like they're talking to a salesperson. They're going to feel like they're talking to, more of like an advisor or a consultant. So I think that's the new way of selling, because people are really tired of the old way of, oh, like you can't get this price anywhere else, and just the misinformation and the pushiness. It doesn't really work anymore. Not in today's age. So I try and always come from a place of helping and serving rather than pushing and closing.
Gotcha. I agree. Sales sometimes have like a bad stigma to it from the past, right? And, you think about back in the day when I was looking to buy a car, I hated going to a car dealership because it's like sharks. They're out there like, take this, sign this deal. And it's like, whoa, like, let me think about it. I think things are changing and for the better. And then just, one open question, right? You had, what many would say, you've been very successful, right? You just got back from vacation, taking some time off. Where do you see yourself in the next 5-10 years, right? Where do you see yourself? Where do you see your business? Where do you see yourself in a personal, financial state? What's in the future?
If we're talking about the next 5 years, I would like to figure out a way to be more virtual. It's not that I don't enjoy putting on 3-piece suits every day and coming to the office, but like I said, I've always had an obsession with traveling. I've always wanted to just see the world, as much of it as I can. So I would like to be in a position where I can work 100% remote. I would like to have traveled much more than I have today. And I would like to have found, the one, as they say. I'm single, no kids, I'm very focused on my business and my agents and my family. I definitely want to have a family, and especially with the thing with my mom, her passing, it's kind of really inspired me to travel and see things that she did. And it really inspired me to want to have a family and raise children and kind of continue that, giving of life that she gave me. And financially, I mean, I'm doing pretty good for myself. I would like to just, at the very least, I would love to continue to have enough to give back to others. And I think there'll be a book in there somewhere for sure. Hopefully a lot more podcasts, and maybe an album. I've not really written much music since I started selling insurance. So I would love to, maybe get an album in there at some point as well.
David, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Amazing story. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for answering these few questions. Isaac, thanks so much for, letting me come in at the end as well. That's all. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, no, Steve, I really, really appreciate you coming on. I know it's sometimes difficult when you just barely meet somebody and, you come on a podcast and not knowing who we are. Man, this podcast is aimed, like I said in the beginning, it's aimed to be something very raw, something deep. The conversations people don't want to hear, but they need to hear. The questions that need to be asked, but people don't want to ask, right? And it does truly, truly help a lot of people. So I'm just very grateful. I'm very honored to just be able to sit with you here virtually and, be able to have this conversation. And I always say this. I always say that when I leave, when I finish a recording, when I finish an episode, it's always, I feel more connected, personal. Like if I knew you for a while, because it's a lot of stories that you share that, these are personal stories. These are personal things. So I'm just really grateful and very, very honored that you were able to come on and share these stories and took the time out of your day. Before I let you go, is there a question that you want to leave for the next guest?
Yeah. If you could go anywhere in the world, where would it be, and why do you want to go there?
Why do you want to go there? Okay, I like that. Awesome. Steve, thank you so much, man. I'm gonna let you go, but I really, really appreciate it. Again, just thank you so much. This episode, we're really ahead with the recordings, and so this episode might not come out until I think next month. We try to push one out every Monday. So I think in the beginning of next month, I think is when this one will be able to come out. What did you think? I mean, I want to get your feedback. What did you think about the conversation? What did you think about just the flow of the conversation?
Yeah, definitely appreciate you guys having me on for sure. This is certainly the heaviest podcast I think I've done. It is some challenging questions that you're throwing out there, man. And I think that if someone's open, and willing to be raw, that, like you said, the genuinity, the realness, the imperfection, that's what the world needs more of right now. That's why people are so afraid to share their stories, because they don't want to be judged. We live in a world where everybody thinks everything has to be perfect. Everybody has to be happy all the time. And that's just not the human experience. So I think it's really an interesting kind of perspective that you're throwing out there for people. And I think it is helpful because, I could sit and talk about all the great things in my life and how successful I am, and, the money and the cars and the suits and all the stuff. But that's not something that resonates with most people. And the thing is, I think it's powerful for people to understand, yes, I have all those things, but I also am a human being, and I've also, suffered and lost and gone through pain, and, it's okay. It's okay to have gone through those things and still win and still succeed. I think that you've really captured that, man. So kudos to you.
If you like this conversation, make sure you guys follow the podcast on Apple and Spotify. Make sure you guys subscribe on YouTube. And if you know of any guest who would be a good fit for our podcast, please send me a message. And most importantly, I hope that you take something out of this podcast to put into perspective in your life and maybe help guide you through the journeys that you're facing right now. So thank you.